Hey guys, welcome to the How They Did It podcast. We're back here with the Scientific Snitch. If you guys haven't seen her videos, you really should. Super educational content, stuff that goes way over my head half of the time. Like I'm sitting there Googling for 10 minutes afterwards. And I'm super duper excited we get to talk to her. She actually debunks a lot of the stuff you see online and will go against very popular takes against other popular figures, especially in the scientific fitness community, which I find super interesting because a lot of times it goes unchallenged. And we're here very, very lucky to have her. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate coming on. So yeah, is there anything that you want me, how do you want me to introduce myself?
Well, just give us a little background of outside. We know that you're smart, but give us your studies and stuff about the behind version of it.
So personally, I do appreciate being called smart. However, something that I like to value is like it's never about somebody's innate smarts. It's just about reading and really diving in and like if you get interested in a topic, I feel like anybody can become smart in anything they want. I am a bachelor's of science in clinical exercise science, and I plan on going into a master's in molecular physiology, hopefully, fingers crossed. Of course, if I get into a PhD program, that would be more ideal. I love doing research. I've been doing it full time for the past year, or a little over a year now, and currently I'm in a cardiology lab, so that's kind of where I'm at. I've done muscle physiology, or at least I've worked in a muscle physiology lab. And that's part of the reason why I know a little bit more on like the glucose and like the metabolic signaling. Other than that, I can't really think of anything else to introduce with. I guess, and I'm a power lifter, or at least I was. That's about it.
Well, that's about it. That's more than most people. I'll say that. I was already like, well, she's killing me so far. So outside, I saw that you're powerlifting. Actually, are you considering doing a bodybuilding show too? I thought I read something like that online recently on one of your stories.
Yeah, I posted it in my story, but right now I'm currently just trying to get myself back into the swing of things after. So last year I had 3 surgeries, which was quite a bit. So I pretty much stopped lifting entirely for about 6 months, which really sucked. But I'm getting back into it now. I just hit like one of the old weights that I used to do, which was very encouraging since it's only been like about, I want to say 3 weeks since I started lifting again. But yeah, I did a powerlifting meet a while ago, so I know how to prep for that. And I want to pursue a bodybuilding show just so that way I can learn the prep. Once I do, then I'll work towards like helping coach other people. I'm not I don't see myself. I could probably go more professional powerlifting wise because I'm strong, but I don't have the genetics for bodybuilding, so I'm not expecting anything great.
Well, I I personally remember one point in time in my life, for half a second, literally half a second, considered it. I was doing a cut for my boss had bet me that I wouldn't be able to get down to single digit body fat. I had kind of been on the road, so I travel 300 days a year. So I was on the road a lot, and my fitness, let's say, took a backseat. At some point, I just was like, I would lift regularly, but I wasn't putting massive attention into my diet and exercise program. Relatively healthy, but I was probably like 25% body fat at the time. Uh, 26 maybe. I was getting up that direction. And he was like, I bet you can't get down to single digit body fat. And I don't remember how many weeks it was, like 12 weeks or something like that. Something ridiculous. And because we bet a significant amount of money on it and just as part of the game, I did the cut super hard, especially being on the road and working. And when I was in the cut for a second, I started seeing myself very lean. I was like probably around the 13, 14% when I started really seeing muscle definition. I was like, oh, I wonder if I really dedicated myself, if I could get down and do anything good in bodybuilding. And then I remember once I got to the single digits, I was like, nope, I don't want to do this. That's okay. Thank you. This is one, I saw my legs are still small. This would take 10 years to even try to compete in any kind of serious level. I'm like, I'm good. I've done enough competing in my life. I'm done.
Yeah, I mean like the only reason why I would do it is because I want to get the experience for it. I feel like that's always valuable, experiencing everything you can. And like, you only live once, so that's like my view on it. I do understand though, because once you do a bodybuilding show, it can be mentally damaging, especially like for people who have had a past of like binging disorders, stuff like that. I used to have an ED myself, so I do try. I am gonna be mindful when I do it. I just feel like it's something that I want to experience as just I've gotten lean before, but I've never gotten that lean, and I've never stepped on stage for it. So that's like where I'm at. But again, I'm not expecting anything great. Like I'm not expecting myself to step on stage and be like the next, I don't know, freaking IF baby or something. Like
Yeah.
I probably won't ever become that. So that's that's my point of view on it.
Well, it's very cool. So I'm gonna jump into something that really interests me that you said recently. I think it got a lot of backlash from different people in the fitness community. It's kind of counter to what's common knowledge in the bodybuilding scene, especially, and even stuff that I would tell my clients. And I'm talking about bulking and cutting. And this subject you brought up about how, especially heavy bulking and force feeding and the building of new fat cells and how detrimental that could be for the eventual cut. I found this fascinating. And I'm curious, maybe if you could walk us through exactly what you mean by that, and then I'll have questions along the way.
Yeah, sure. So starting off with, I guess, I'll start off with the bodybuilding part. So a lot of people they are misconstrued and they believe that bodybuilders build muscle through bulking and cutting. However, the smart ones don't actually do that. They never get super overfat in their off season, so they're never really bulking. They're really just bulking up to a healthy body fat percentage after a show. Because as you know, when you bodybuild, you have to cut down really, really lean to the point where it's really unhealthy. And that's when you usually step on stage. After you step on stage, you're at a really unhealthy body fat percentage, and you obviously should put on some fat. So I guess that brings up the first point where a lot of people tend to misconstrue what I'm saying is it's not bulking and cutting is not entirely necessary. Like there's never a situation where you should bulk and cut. You just don't need a bulk and cut once you get to a healthy body fat percentage. So what a lot of bodybuilders will do, or at least the smart ones, when they get off stage and they're really lean, they bulk up to a healthy body fat percentage, but they avoid losing their abs, they avoid getting super fluffy. And the reason for this is because when they're in the off season, they're in the off season, but the moment it becomes in season, they should be max like 12, 15 weeks out from what I've seen. Like they shouldn't have a prep that lasts all year, if that makes sense. So they shouldn't be just literally cutting during their off season. That's not conducive of growing the most amount of muscle they can. So that's like the first misconception that I believe a lot of people say because many people come up to me and they're like, yeah, but bodybuilders bulk and cut. And I'm like, bodybuilders cut down to single digit body fat and they need to get to a healthy body fat percentage. Like, there's no way they could realistically train hard and build a significant amount of muscle if they were to maintain their body fat at like literally shredded to the bone. That being said, is putting on body fat necessary to build muscle? No, it's not. So there have been a few people who have tried to like have a gotcha moment with me where they cite a bunch of studies. They usually end up proving my point. There's two studies in particular that were recently studied. One was actually in a very recent story where the individual cited this one study that was saying when people got overfed and they got overfed protein, they gained a little bit of lean mass. Now, that's true because protein is a signaling, it's a part of the signal for muscle growth. However, when we're talking about increasing the protein intake without any sort of resistance training or training stimulus, then you're looking at, well, is that person actually even moving around? Because if you are using protein, which is a signaling molecule, like amino acids themselves are signaling molecules to other proteins in cells, when you have either training or a high protein intake, you're going to gain a certain amount of muscle. But if you don't add in training and you only have the protein, you're going to hit a plateau, which we saw in that study that was just overfeeding with no training. And the individuals, what it looked like was they gained a little lean mass, then it kind of plateaued right here. And it was the same for both the high and normal protein group, which goes to show that it's not just overfeeding and you actually have to train. Now, putting that into context with the whole fat gain part, in the study, all three groups, regardless of whether they ate protein, low protein, high protein, all gained the same amount of fat because they were all in the same amount of calorie surplus. Now, when we combine this with other studies that have found that slight to large caloric surpluses don't result in a significant amount of muscle gain when compared to fat gain in a resistance training context, this all goes to show that when we're talking about fat and muscle, there are tissues that depend inherently on two separate kinds of methods of growth. So, fat gain primarily depends on the surplus of energy. When you have too much energy, when you have too much over what you are expending throughout the day. So, this is where I kind of can get into explain like what total daily energy expenditure is and what we actually define as like fat gain, muscle gain, all that other stuff. So, total daily energy expenditure is everything you expend throughout the day. Every part of your energy, exercise, the recovery process to exercise. If you got a paper cut, the energy that you used to heal that paper cut, all of that is a part of total daily energy expenditure because it's literally total daily energy expenditure. It's pretty self explanatory. Now, people seem to think that the processes for muscle growth aren't included in that. That's not true because if you can protein synthesis for cutting yourself and then having that wound heal is a part of your total daily energy expenditure, if exercise itself is a part of total daily energy expenditure, sorry about that, then the process for recovery, the process to recover your muscles from exercise, all of that would also be a part of total daily energy expenditure. And the actual process for muscle growth isn't that energy costly. It doesn't cost a lot of energy when you put it in context to, let's say, fat gain. Because fat gain, well, the actual physiological purpose of that excess fat is to be able to have energy when you don't have enough energy. It's a reason why people, usually when they're in like starvation situations, people who are a little fatter, they're going to survive longer because they have more fat to use. And your body will preferentially use fat stores over your organs, your muscles, and your brain, and all those other things when you are in that state. When we're talking about somebody just physiologically, fat is the extra energy store, while muscle is not. It's primarily used for you to move around. So, all that being said, the process for growing muscle is a part of total daily energy expenditure. It just physiologically makes sense, and there's not really a good argument for saying that it's not a part of it. And there's also no literature to suggest that either. So I guess that kind of covers most of like what I was saying and like any sort of like misconceptions there. I hope that didn't like confuse you too much.
No, no, no. It makes perfect sense, and I want to talk about it from like a practical standpoint. So, if somebody were their goal was to gain muscle, let's say over a period of time, 6 months, a year, something of that nature, when they were trying to build out their diet or the total and try to figure out well, how many calories they should be eating, are you suggesting that it just be a slight surplus, or you're just suggesting that the surplus, you build the surplus as your needs grow? So as you gain a little bit of weight over the time, you increase your surplus a little bit over and slowly over time. In like a practical sense, how would that work?
So, first, I'd like to get out of the, I guess, habit of saying surplus. I made the mistake of trying to simplify it down for people, and when I tried to simplify it down, it ended up making it more complicated in my first video, the very first one where I was like, if you are at a healthy body fat percentage and you don't need a bulk and cut. And then at the very end, I basically said surplus because I was trying to simplify it for a practical standpoint, but clearly it didn't work. But it's not really a surplus. In reality, when you exercise, you're burning calories. When you recover, you're burning calories. All of that is a part of the maintenance calories that you have to replace for it to be defined as maintenance, because maintenance calories is replacing the energy that you expend in your total daily energy expenditure. So, in reality, the actual amount of calories that you consume to replace exercise, to replace the recovery of exercise, all that other stuff is a part of maintenance. So, you're not really eating in a surplus. Now, from a practical standpoint, individuals aren't going to gain a super crazy amount of muscle from an advanced point. If they're beginners, they'll gain a little bit extra, but It's not like they're gaining 40 plus pounds of muscle in a year. It's
No.
more than likely it's going to be maybe if they have really peak genetics, maybe 20, maybe a little bit extra, but realistically it's not going to be that much as a beginner. And then even as an advanced lifter, now you're even looking at even less where it's like 2, 5, maybe if you have really good genetics, maybe a little bit more, but it's so unrealistic to think that you're going to gain like 50 plus pounds of muscle. So when people say, "Oh yeah, I want to go from 200 lean to 250 lean," I'm like, that's not going to happen. Good luck. Um, that being said, if somebody is starting from a healthy body fat percentage, they're an advanced lifter, what I would suggest is eating maintenance calories and then fueling your workout. So having an apple, having a Rice Krispie treat, having some sort of carb source before your workout, and that pretty much covers it. You're not going to burn more than, let's say, 200-ish calories in a workout, and that's counting like a little bit of cardio in the beginning. But if you take that cardio away, you're pushing it down to maybe 150, 180, and then that's like being generous if you're doing a leg day. So that's like the general idea where it's like you're fueling your workout, and that's all you really got to worry about. Beyond that, you're just eating maintenance calories.
Okay. And
When I say maintenance, sorry. When I say maintenance, I mean like replacing your BMR, so your basal metabolic rate.
okay, so like let's just to make an example here. Let's assume somebody's maintenance is 2,000 calories. They're 160 pounds or something. Their goal is to gain muscle. They're fueling the workout. They're eating. Over time, they should be seeing slight increases on the scale as they're gaining more muscle, right? Would that not be, is that not a logical conclusion?
Yes, and also partially it wouldn't be very noticeable. I would track strength and progress in the gym over the scale any day, because the amount of muscle that you'd be gaining from week to week is literally grams. When I tell my clients, like, oh yeah, I don't feel like I'm growing, I don't feel like I'm growing, I'm like, well, what are you tracking from week to week? And they're like, I'm tracking my weight. And I'm like, you're not going to gain 5 pounds of muscle in a week. You got to be a little bit more realistic here. So track your strength. Are you getting stronger? Did you bench more? Did you bench, or sorry, did you like row more or squat more? Did you do anything like more than last week? And usually they'll answer, yes, I did. I added 5 pounds to my bench. And even though I didn't make progress on this exercise, I made progress on this one. And I'm like, then you're gaining muscle. Don't worry about it. At that point, you'll start to see the progress over time. And then you'll see with some of my long term clients where they gain a significant amount of muscle throughout the time they work with me, but they barely change their body fat. And if we're talking about general health clients, I feel like that's the more feasible and also metabolically healthy way to do things, because you're not cycling body fat, which we know from a health standpoint and a metabolic health standpoint that cycling weight and cycling body fat doesn't really result in a net positive and usually results in some disordered eating.
100%. I'm curious about this because tracking strength, there's also the neurological adaptations to the lifts. Like especially let's say you've jumped your program is doing bench. Your bench from week to week might be going up in the beginning. It's not for sure that that is increased muscle size. It also could be neurological adaptations to gaining that bench. So do you like track multiple factors, or do you just say eventually it will be muscle? So even if it's neurological adaptation in the beginning, at some point then it'll be the muscle adaptation.
I would say if you're tracking in the very beginning, like when I was talking about like tracking strength, I was talking more about my long-term clients who are like, "Oh yeah, why am I not gaining muscle?" And I'd be like, "Well, first compare yourself to when you first started here, and you clearly gained some size. That being said, you also jumped your bench up like 10 pounds since you started working with me. Obviously, you're gaining muscle. That being said, if you are increasing in neurological adaptations, yeah, wait for that phase to like diminish a little bit more, but that realistically takes like 1 to 2 weeks of consistent training. Let's say you're only training 3 times a week, maybe I'd push that to 3 weeks out, but it's not. Neurological adaptations are fairly acute and they usually go away if you keep consistency pretty high. So I would say neurological adaptations are a good sign. And then past that, if you keep making that progress, then you're fine. And it's really not something I feel like a lot of people get it in their head that making like growing muscle is super difficult. And the real part about it is that it's mainly consistency. If you're consistent in the gym, you could have the most dog shit bro split program on the planet, but you'd probably still gain some muscle.
Oh, definitely. Even if your technique is quite off, obviously depending on genetics, but you'll see people in the gym that they're swinging the weights around, but they're actually, over time, they've been swinging the weights maybe without the best technique, but for such a long period of time, so consistently year over year, and they make pretty good progress. Like, would it be more, is it the optimal? Probably not, but it's definitely works.
Yeah. And that's also another point, like when it comes to like exercises and like training optimally, like I'm all for a proponent of training based on science. I feel like that's a really good way to train because if you're training based on science, then you're more likely to make that extra amount of progress. Let's say you gain 5 inches over the course of a training lifetime on your arms. Well, maybe you would have gained 6 if you actually did it optimally, or if you did it with a little bit better form. That being said, 5 inches is still pretty big. Like, it's not gonna be nothing. So, people get so caught up in the details and the analysis paralysis of it that they forget that the human body is very resilient and you can gain muscle in a deficit. So, it's not, even though you are gaining at maintenance, it's not going to be less than if you were cutting. And it's also going to be more metabolically healthy for the long run.
That's awesome. I want to jump into another question that I have, and I'm curious on your take on it. I don't know if you've mentioned it at all. I wanted to know what you thought about like the partitioning ratio for people that do want to gain muscle. Um, do you believe that if somebody, let's say, is in the 20+% body fat range and their goal still is muscle gain, do you think that they will gain less muscle than if they were to lower their body fat and start from a more metabolically healthy state, from maybe a leaner being 15% body fat, let's say?
So that really depends on the individual. So everybody has kind of like this genetic sweet spot where they prefer to be. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that you can't lose the body fat for mental health reasons, for, I don't know, you like looking a certain way. The only thing is you have to keep that off for a long period of time to allow your body to adjust to that. And once your fat cells turn over and kind of get a new restart, you're gonna feel pretty much the same as you were at that higher body fat percentage. So it really depends not only on the person's starting point from like just a like since they were like really little, if they always maintained about 20% body fat, that's probably where they're meant to be. I mean, if they really want to go down, they can. They just have to maintain that. If they try to cycle through that and they keep gaining back up to 20% and then losing it to 15%, they're gonna feel like dog shit whenever they're hitting that 15%. But that being said, if you maintain the 15% for like 7 plus years, at that point your body's going to get used to it and you'll be pretty much fine. So it just depends on who you are. I would say if you started from a really overweight point, it's probably going to be better physiologically. Like if you were at like, let's say 45% body fat, yeah, lose the body fat first. At that point, you're like risking your metabolic health. And on top of that, it's not good for your heart to be like super over fat. It's not good for your entire body. Like there's increased risks. Oh my God. I can't speak today. Increased risk of cancer, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of dementia. There's so many increased risks of diseases when it comes to being over fat that I would never recommend for somebody to remain over fat in the same way I wouldn't recommend somebody to be under fat. If you're underweight, increased risk of osteoporosis, sarcopenia, mortality with cancer. So usually people who are overfat have an increased risk of cancer, but people who are underweight have an increased risk of mortality from cancer. And because cancer is just random mutations, if you do get it, it can be very lethal. So we're talking at two ends of the spectrum. Both are unhealthy. Both you should be in a healthy body fat percentage. That being said, once you get in range and you're in that 20, 15%, and then usually it can go down to like 10% for men. When you're in the healthy range, then you shouldn't worry too much.
Okay, that's interesting. I was asking that was also a selfish question because I have decided recently to take my fitness more seriously than I have been in the past couple of years. And I started doing it and I saw some gains. kind of like muscle memory gains, like kind of things came back from having been kind of off. They came back, and I got excited. I was like, oh, I'm gonna really try to focus on this. And I've been sitting in this space right now where I was like, I want to get a bit bigger. I want to see where I can get to size wise and muscle size wise. And I'm probably hovering around like the 18 to 20. I have no DEXA scan. I'm spitballing it. And I've just kind of been like stuck in how I've been thinking about it. Like, should I cut down first to make to have a better better ratio of gaining from muscle to fat? But now, like what you're saying, if I don't eat in a surplus or I'm just eating at maintenance, focusing more on my lifts and them getting stronger, I'll still be gaining the muscle just over time. I might not be seeing the scale jump up as much, but I won't be gaining the fat as well.
Yeah, and like if you feel healthy, if you feel like this is where you feel the most comfortable, why would I tell you to cut down? I mean, it's like it's counterintuitive to like what I'm preaching because I'm saying like being underweight is bad, being overweight is bad. Why would I preach to go back to being underweight? Like if you feel like going under 20 or 18, 20% is not it like you don't feel good, then don't do it. So, if you feel good at like 15%, by all means, if you want to do it, go for it. I'm not like one to like tell people what to do, and like between like 5 to like 3% body fat, I don't feel like there's a really big difference in how I feel. Maybe I feel like a little extra hungry, but it's not like that noticeable. So if you feel good and you want to be leaner, by all means. If you don't and you just want to get stronger, by all means. So it's as I said, like the human body is shades of gray and really malleable and really resilient. So it's something that's really nice about humans, but it's also something that I feel like a lot of people don't take for granted.
Well, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. I would actually want to ask you another question because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to ask, what are some things that are really popular right now, like lengthened partials, the amount of volume, sets, things that are out there? I know like there's guys that you've disagreed with publicly a lot, like Mike Israetel and very popular figures on the internet. Could you name me just a couple things that are very popular right now that maybe you think are overhyped or there's more nuance to it and they're being pushed because of one study too quickly onto the public?
Yeah, so first, I guess I could get into the length and partials part of things, and I guess this is more on the lifting side. Um, there's been a lot of optimal training lifter type people who have been really glorifying the length and partial thing. I personally don't understand it because like both the actual shortening of the muscle and the lengthening of the muscle both exact tension onto muscle proteins, which is what stimulates growth. The only difference is one is active and one is passive. Now, if passive tension alone was like the most stimulating factor known to man, then yoga moms would be the most jacked people known on the planet. But we clearly don't see that. And when I say yoga moms, I'm talking about like the yoga moms who like go to like yoga classes and they're like basically doing progressive overload with yoga where they're starting off with a really easy movement and they're getting like progressively more stretched and more they're exacting more tension through that stretch. Obviously, it's not loaded, so it's a little different, but still, you would see a lot more muscle on your yoga moms than we do actually see. That being said, both the stretched part of the movement and the shortened part of the movement both have hypertrophic factors that need to be further explored and have not been. So on the concentric side, so the shortening side, there has been a few in vitro studies and in vivo studies recently that have found that electrical stimulus, which is basically the driving factor of shortening, has been found to have hypertrophic benefits in muscle cells. So, literally electrocuting a cell will cause it to grow. Similarly, we have studies that have found that simply static stretching has been found to stimulate a little bit of muscle growth. But nothing works as well as when you do both in resistance training.
Yes.
So, like it's like you're talking about two ends of the spectrum here where you got a little growth with the stretch, a little growth with the shortening, why don't you just put it together and do both?
Both, yeah.
But like, I guess people are so obsessed with the idea of a lengthened partial or like this one magic fix. And it's the same thing with the volume and the sets. It's like people are so obsessed with boxing humans into this like little box. Like if you do lengthened partials, you're optimizing your growth. If you do X amount of sets and you like really push for a lot of volume, then you're gonna grow. But nobody ever like everyone's so afraid of just saying if you progress from week to week, you're growing muscle. Don't worry about it too much. Just eat enough protein and train.
It, it's so simple that it'd be hard to make content every week on it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really big reason. It's that, and also I've noticed that between the I don't really like naming people on podcasts, but I'm just gonna do it because I know like what I know like the kind of group they are. They really just I've noticed they love publishing meta-analyses, but they barely ever do any sort of like biomedical techniques where they're like taking biopsies, running like an RNA-seq, or doing something that actually would show the mechanism of what they're talking about. They're so afraid to demonstrate that what they're talking about has a mechanism and rooting out that mechanism that it makes me kind of not want to read their papers as much because they don't have a full-fledged argument. It's like they have half the argument, but they missed out on the rest of it. So they have the outcomes, and some of their outcomes are pretty decent, but the issue is that they don't have the rest of it, which
So
is usually like when you look at a good comprehensive study, you have the outcome data like from humans, and then you also have something in mice that shows, hey, this is the actual reason why this occurred. But nobody, yeah, so that's I feel
what
like that's the biggest reason.
what do you think the reason that they don't do that? Do you think it's just they don't there's some reasoning for it, or just because they have this meta-analysis, they're trying to get as much out there as possible, and that's the reason? Or do you have a theory on that?
I mean, there's only so many kind of not so great meta-analyses that you can make in a single sitting. So like they've made, dear Lord, the amount of reviews and meta-analyses that these people publish, it's insane. I don't see that as often with a lot of the PIs that I've personally worked with. You'll see reviews, but usually those reviews are followed up by a study, like a legitimate like randomized controlled trial, not just like meta-analysis after meta-analysis, review after review. And I feel like a big reason is just because it's a little easier to write than it is to do like RNA-seq. It's also more
Mm,
expensive. So on their side of things, I understand why they don't do it, but I just wish they did.
yeah.
Even though they wouldn't publish as much, it would give a lot more context to what they're talking about rather than just citing some like basically citing the same old things over and over and over again, but not really fully rooting out what they're talking about, or at least trying to prove the other side. A good scientist tries to prove both their side and the other side. They never try to go down the other side. They just completely write it off as non existent. I remember watching one clip by Dr. Israel where he was saying that the lengthened, what is it called? The length tension relationship didn't exist or something. And I was just like, I don't just if you're going to disagree with something, at least try to prove it wrong rather than just saying it doesn't exist, is my point, at least.
Yeah, I completely see that. I completely see that. And it's funny that I mean, I'm still, I love reading their stuff. I love reading their research when they do bring it out. Having watched videos like yours did make me yearn for more information. Like I did start wanting to see the mechanistic side of things a little more so I can understand the reasoning. And it made me start that I wasn't questioning. I was always, I had an open mind. I was super excited that there was any kind of research on the subjects to begin with. But I wanted to see more of it, and I think the more you're out there and other people are out there that are pushing, I don't want to say against because I know that you don't have any kind of animosity towards them, but just from a scientific perspective, I think the more we'll see that happen, I think that we'll start investing in other kinds of studies with randomized controlled my mouth, you got it. I think that will happen. So I think what you're doing by having an opposed viewpoint or at least questioning their viewpoint publicly as your audience is growing will only push for better science to be done in this field over time.
Yeah, I agree. I like don't dislike them at all. I just wish that there was more evidence out there and it would be really great to see it. So, I really do hope that they start coming out with more stuff and honestly, I reached out to Jeff Nippert and he responded. So, hopefully in the future I can do like an RNA-seq sort of study with a similar study design that he had. Obviously, nothing is ever going to be a perfect study design, but at least if we have more comprehensive data, we can gather a better opinion on how things work and how things function. And I feel like that's a very good thing to have is like science is about disagreements and about like respectful discourse and learning more. It's never about we figured out exactly how everything works. This is how it works. Nobody can disagree with me. I'm the smartest person in the room. Like that sort of ideology is the ideology of somebody who isn't a scientist and is the ideology of somebody who doesn't have an open mind or somebody who doesn't want to learn. And the moment you stop learning is the moment you stop actually progressing and advancing and being a part of the human race that is always advancing. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to have is always learning. And I hope that I can continue learning and that I never like actively try not to get sucked into it because I always try to read both sides. I understand both sides and I want to understand it even more than we already do. I feel like right now it's a 50-50 on benefits and cons for both sides, and it's just about like having more evidence.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the pod. It was great to have you. I try not to keep my guests too long because we're a growing audience. We're so small. We want you to invite you back and not to think that we're going to take 10 hours of your time. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for dropping so much knowledge here. You've given me a whole bunch to take away with. I'm sure you're going to give a bunch of my clients and a bunch of people that watch the podcast a lot to take away with. I want to thank you, the Scientific Snitch. You can follow her on Instagram, TikTok. I don't know about how TikTok's working right now in the States. I'm not in America right this minute, but maybe it's banned, maybe it's not. I don't know what's going on. But TikTok at some point, I don't know if you have any other social media platforms you like to call out. Please do.
Mainly just YouTube, it's the same username, but yeah, no, I appreciate it so much for coming on and honestly, I usually book out like the entire hour, so next time if you want to go a little more, I'm perfectly fine with that as well. So,
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I always try to keep it. I try to keep a hard rule because I don't like keeping people on until I'm like 40 minutes until my audience grows. Then I'll be able to feel I can take more time from you guys.
yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck with your audience and coaching and all that other stuff. You seem like you're very well, like you have a good open mind, which is really important. So, it was really great talking with you.
Same here. Thank you so much. And this video will be out soon. And by the way, you can reshare it, do everything you ever want with this. We would love it. We appreciate it a lot.
Of course, I'd be happy to share a few shorts of it. So.
Perfect.